Did you know there was a time when American truckers were not racing the clock? They were racing the fuel gauge? This will blow your mind. In the 1970s, the oil crisis stranded rigs, emptied truck stops, and nearly shut down the highways. And this what you didn't know. Truckers did not just survive it, they rewrote the rules of the road forever. A golden age brought to a halt. In the early 1970s, trucking in America was riding high. The interstate system was nearly complete, freight demand was climbing, and diesel was so cheap that nobody bothered calculating fuel mileage. Big block V8s and even V12 diesels dominated the highways, not for efficiency, but for sheer pulling power. Truck stops were full of chrome and character. The CB radio was just starting to knit together a coast-to-coast community of drivers, and the idea that fuel could become scarce seemed absurd. But in October 1973, the music stopped. The Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries announced an oil embargo on nations supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War, and the United States was high on that list. Almost overnight, the price of crude oil quadrupled. Diesel prices shot up and shortages swept the country. Long lines formed at gas stations, and rationing became the new reality. For the men and women who made their living behind the wheel of an eight-wheeler, this was not just an inconvenience. It was an existential threat. From open road to tactical driving before the embargo, a long-haul trip was straightforward. You filled up where it was convenient, ran at whatever speed got you there fastest, and rarely thought about your next fuel stop. By late 1973, trucking had turned into a strategic operation. Owner-operators began keeping notebooks filled with fuel station intel, which stations had diesel, how much they would sell per customer, and when deliveries were expected. The CB radio transformed overnight from a social tool to a lifeline. Drivers used it to broadcast real-time updates about fuel availability, ration limits, and prices. Every mile suddenly counted. Truckers planned routes not for speed, but for survival, detouring to reach stations that still had diesel and topping off tanks at every opportunity, no matter how little was needed. Many began driving at night to avoid the longest lines. The speed limit that changed everything for years, speed was king. Many drivers liked to run 70 miles per hour or more on the open interstate, knowing they could shave hours off a run. Speed burned fuel, and in a world where diesel was both expensive and scarce, that became a luxury no one could afford. Then came the Emergency Highway Energy Conservation Act of 1974, setting a national maximum speed limit of 55 miles per hour. It was intended to save fuel across the board, but it hit truckers hard. Delivery schedules had to be rewritten, and more time on the road meant more nights away from home. Slowing down was not just about obeying the law, it was a survival strategy. Dropping speed could save multiple gallons over the course of a haul, and when those gallons determined whether you could make your next stop, that mattered. Fuel-saving ingenuity on the fly, with fuel prices high and supply unpredictable, truckers and mechanics turned into inventors. Aerodynamic add-ons began appearing, including homemade cab extenders, nose cones, and side fairings meant to smooth airflow. These were crude by today's standards, but every little bit helped. Engines were swapped out for smaller, more efficient diesels, injection timing was fine-tuned, and tire pressure became a daily concern. Even simple changes mattered. Bobtail shields designed to reduce wind drag behind the cab made a measurable difference in fuel use. These were not factory features. They were survival tools built in small shops or welded together in someone's driveway. The rise of the dual tank. If there was one modification that defined the era, it was the dual fuel tank. More capacity meant fewer stops, greater flexibility in choosing where to fuel, and the ability to pass up overpriced or low-supply stations. Some drivers pushed it further, carrying portable diesel drums. This was not exactly legal and certainly not safe, but when the alternative was running dry on the side of the interstate, the choice was clear. Drivers even bought fuel in cheaper states and hauled it into areas where shortages were worse, creating a small underground market on the side. Unity in protest and convoy culture. Truckers did not just adapt quietly. In late 1973 and early 1974, frustration boiled over into strikes, blockades, and rolling protests. Convoys of rigs would crawl along highways, deliberately clogging traffic to draw attention to high prices, rationing, and the new 55-mile-per-hour limit. The CB radio became the protest's nerve center, coordinating meetups and timing slow rolls. These actions caught the public's eye and helped cement the rebellious, self-reliant image of the American trucker in popular culture. That image was immortalized in 1975 when C.W. McCall's song Convoy hit the charts. A fictionalized but very real reflection of how united and defiant drivers could be when pushed to the limit. Making every load pay fuel caused forced carriers and drivers to become laser-focused on efficiency. Running empty, known as deadheading, became an expensive mistake to avoid at all costs. Dispatchers hustled to book backhauls, even low-paying ones, so trucks were not burning fuel for no revenue. Freight consolidation became standard practice, with trailers loaded as close to capacity as possible before leaving the yard. Truckers themselves took on more control over their routes and load planning, using their own contacts and CB intel to keep their rigs profitable and moving. Truck stops become survival HQs. In the pre-internet age, truck stops became information hubs. Bulletin boards listed fuel delivery times and ration policies. Over coffee, drivers swapped first-hand reports of which stations still had diesel and what it cost. Mechanics offered on-the-spot fuel-saving upgrades or quick repairs to keep rigs on the move. Some truck stops even became barter zones, where fuel additives, spare parts, and sometimes even gallons of diesel changed hands. It was a face-to-face network that kept the trucking community connected when official channels lagged behind reality. Life on the road under fuel rationing. The crisis did not just change how truckers ran their rigs. It reshaped their daily lives. Long waits at fuel stations meant hours of downtime, sometimes spent parked on the shoulder or idling in endless lines. Paychecks shrank when fewer miles were driven. Many truckers began packing more food in their cabs, knowing they might not reach a diner before closing. Entertainment shifted as well. The CB radio became more than a work tool. It was constant company, buzzing with chatter that mixed fuel intel, road hazard warnings, and humor to lighten the mood. Relationships deepened between drivers who might have been strangers in better times. Shared struggle forged a sense of unity that went beyond competition for loads. Even rest stops changed. Drivers lingered longer, swapping stories and strategies, comparing notes on where to find diesel, and sharing mileage-saving tricks. It was a harder life, but also a more connected one, and many old-timers say that camaraderie was worth something you could not measure in gallons, changing what and how they hauled fuel. Uncertainty made certain loads risky. Perishable goods with tight delivery windows were vulnerable to delays caused by shortages. So many drivers shifted to hauling non-perishable freight such as machinery, building materials, or packaged goods, where timing was more flexible. Some switched entirely to regional or local runs. Shorter routes meant lower fuel bills and less risk of being stranded far from home. The pay was often smaller, but it kept trucks moving and businesses alive. The 1979 oil shock. Deja vu on the highway. By the late 1970s, the worst of the crisis seemed over. Drivers had adapted, fuel availability had improved, and the industry had embraced efficiency as a long-term goal. Then came 1979. The Iranian Revolution disrupted oil production worldwide, sending prices soaring again. Shortages returned, and so did the lines at gas stations. This time, truckers did not panic. They knew the playbook: plan routes carefully, keep speeds down, use dual tanks, and coordinate over the CB. The difference now was that manufacturers were producing more aerodynamic cabs and more efficient engines, giving drivers an edge they had not had in 1973, a crisis that changed trucking forever. The oil crises of the 1970s left lasting marks on the industry. Fuel efficiency became a permanent concern, not a temporary adjustment. The CB radio cemented itself as a vital tool, both for camaraderie and for survival information. Culturally, the crisis helped shape the mythos of the American trucker: resourceful, independent, and united when the chips were down. Movies and TV shows like Smokey and the Bandit and BJ and the Bear built on that image, but its roots were in the real challenges drivers overcame during those years. Why they made it through truckers survived because they adapted faster than the crisis could break them. They learned to plan like logisticians, drive like fuel misers, and operate as a network rather than lone wolves. They found fuel when it was scarce, shared information before the internet made it easy, and kept the country supplied through two of the toughest energy shocks in modern history. In trucking, horsepower moves the load, but resilience keeps you in the game. In the 1970s, resilience was worth more than any gallon of diesel. If you found this journey through the 1970s oil crisis fascinating, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves trucking history. And if you have a story from those years, or know someone who does, drop it in the comments. Let us keep those miles and memories alive.